It's the real, raw, charted life of Emma. Welcome to the Cyclical Doula podcast. I'm Emma Goff, a certified SymptoPro instructor, fertility awareness educator, and your guide for fertility coaching and reproductive health education from menarche to menopause and all the different types of motherhood in between. If you're seeking a natural science-backed approach to managing your fertility, understanding your cycle, or simply connecting with your body in any way, you're in the right place. All right, so today I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I've been up to. So I was in Austin for a week on a retreat, and it was just great to connect with other birth workers. But the world has been feeling extra heavy recently, and I sat in the sunshine today while the kids played, and I couldn't stop thinking about the kind of world that they're growing up in and how my husband and I keep saying to each other that we should not feel sorry for raising dragon slayers in a time when there are actual dragons. There are so many things that I fight for quietly, and yet I think it's important to be loud about them too. And because this is the real, raw, charted life of MMA, I want to be clear about some things that are important to me. So I'm for informed consent in everything. No one, the government, doctors, partners, strangers, should be making choices about somebody else's body. I'm for calling people for what they ask to be called. If you can remember remember the difference between how somebody's name is slightly pronounced differently or spelled differently, you can respect a name and a pronoun. I'm for using real, anatomically correct language. Bodies aren't shameful. Knowing how yours works shouldn't be controversial. I'm for not sexualizing things that aren't sexual. Breastfeeding isn't inappropriate. Teaching kids proper terms for their body isn't weird. And a person simply existing in their body is not an invitation for debate. I'm for shame-free sex and reproductive health education. Fear and misinformation don't prevent pregnancy or STIs. Education does. I'm for emotional intelligence and boundaries. Teaching people, especially kids, how to name their feelings, set limits, and respect others isn't soft, it's survival. I'm for people getting what they need to live. Food, water, housing, medical care, mental health support. These aren't luxuries. These are basic human rights. I'm for wellness that actually means care, not just another marketing buzzword, but real support, body autonomy, access to healthcare, rest, and respect. I will not apologize for believing in human dignity. I will not water it down to make it more comfortable. I will not raise children who stand by while people in power strip away rights, erase identities, or make survival a privilege. I'm raising dragon slayers, and I'm fighting for a world where they don't have to fight so damn hard. So today, I wanted to talk about your body, about how cycles work, and just kind of get into what you might not have heard before on a little bit of a deeper level. So if you'll bear with me as we talk through, and if you need more of a visual, hop into the Red Circle, our free community that is on a Facebook group. The link will be in the show notes, but there's some good visuals on there and in there, and I'll continue to post those as well, so that can help with your understanding. So let's start with a little bit of anatomy first. So I think this is really important when we're talking about the female reproductive system. We need to talk about anatomy, and we need to talk about anatomy in its whole, and not just the fact that we normally hear the word vagina and think that that's the only female anatomy, but that is really only the inner part of the female anatomy. And so there is, let's see, we'll start with the vulva, which is the outer part of the female anatomy that you can see. And that includes things like the vaginal opening, the urethral opening, the clitoris, the labia, and then inside in the reproductive system, the canal is called the vagina, and then that connects to the cervix, which connects to the uterus, and then there's the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, and so that's the majority of it. But let's talk through what some of those are. So let's go back. The urethral opening, that's for where the bladder releases urine. The clitoris is a pleasure center. And the vaginal opening, obviously opening to your vagina, where menstrual blood and cervical mucus can come out, as well as the canal in which a baby can be birthed. Let's see. Then the cervix is an opening between the vagina and the uterus. And the uterus is where your endometrium is, and where a baby could grow. And that is can expand greatly during pregnancy if that is to take place. And then your ovaries are where your eggs grow or start, and they start with a follicle, and they grow there, turn into an ovum, and then could be released through the fallopian tubes for the potential of a baby. So that's kind of like super brief. Always can go into more detail if you have more questions about that. But some visuals, getting a great resource about that is awesome. I really like Learn Body Lit website. I'll be sure to add that into the show notes as well, because they have some amazing resources. But I think, so now that we've talked about anatomy a little bit, let's talk through the phases of the menstrual cycle. I mentioned this a teeny bit in the last one, but I think it's kind of helpful to talk through this again. So when we're talking about the menstrual cycle in a whole and in context, there's multiple different layers of this. So we typically see that menstruation is the thing that people focus on, right? Periods are things that people focus on the most. But it's important to remember that an ideal menstrual cycle is actually focusing on ovulation, making sure that ovulation is taking place, because that means that our reproductive hormones are working in the way that they should. So in an ideal menstrual cycle, menstruation starts first, and then comes the follicular phase. And in that first part of the cycle, the follicles, begin to grow and produce estrogen. Estrogen causes the cervix to become softer, higher, more open and wet. So in the process of releasing the egg, the follicle changes into what's called the corpus luteum. And now, instead of producing estrogen as the primary hormone, it produces progesterone. Progesterone does a couple really cool things. It prevents ovulation from happening again in any part of the cycle, and it also enriches that uterine lining to prepare for the potential of a baby. It forms this, also the progesterone helps form this thick mucus plug at the cervix to keep out any bacteria. And also, a really cool thing is that it causes your waking basal body temperature to rise and to stay higher in that phase that's after ovulation. So those are some really cool things when we think about the fact that throughout a cycle, that if fertilization were to take place when the sperm fertilizes the egg cell in that upper third of the fallopian tube, most often, it takes about a week for the zygote to travel down that fallopian tube and implant, which then produces HCG and tells the corpus luteum to keep functioning and prevent menstruation. So about after 2 weeks later, if the corpus luteum is continuing to produce HCG, then like a pregnancy will be detected and it will can be sustained. If though the corpus luteum, it will stop functioning if HCG is not detected. It will stop producing estrogen and progesterone, and the uterine lining then becomes menstruation. And that drop in progesterone also happens. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about this? Yeah. So the really cool thing about our cycles is that we can see these hormones at play through different fertility biomarkers. So we can see them in things like cervical mucus, urine hormone testing, basal body temperature, things like that. And then sometimes even like secondary signs like intermenstrual pain, or like there's another word for it that I'm forgetting. But like ovulation pain is sometimes what people call it, or like breast tenderness, things like that, that we can see that line up, right? And there's so many things people notice, like their libido changes during that, around ovulation, or their mood changes. So all of those things can be really helpful in general. But when we're talking about defining the fertile window, meaning the time that a pregnancy could possibly take place, we can use a couple different biomarkers to determine that. Most of the time, the ones that are going to open that fertile window are going to be estrogen signs, or like a calculation of some sort to figure that out. And so a lot of people use a cervical mucus point of change to open that fertile window. Some people are using calculations, and then some people are using hormonal testing to open that fertile window. And then on the flip side, closing the fertile window often looks at those progesterone signs or the change in estrogen, but ideally that progesterone sign. And so sometimes that means that people are looking at like an LH or a peak on a monitor through urine testing. Sometimes it's a cervical mucus peak. Sometimes it's that basal body temperature shift that's ovulation related and not like illness related. And then some people are looking at like progesterone tests as well. And a lot of these, many methods use like a combination of these things to determine that. So the idea of using a fertility awareness-based method is that you're charting these daily fertility signs, and looking for the patterns to figure out when in a cycle you could possibly get pregnant and when you could not. And through that, you're able to then use that for whatever family planning intentions you have, health information that you want, reproductive health choices that you need, things like that. So I think that there's so much knowledge in being able to come from a place of, I know what my body is doing in this particular part of my cycle, and therefore I can feel empowered and confident in intimacy, and empowered and confident in family planning choices, and empowered and confident in reproductive health choices. And I think that just overall, this is such a huge benefit to literally everybody. So anyways, I guess what I'm getting at the end of this podcast episode is just how cool the female reproductive body is. It starts with the brain, right? Like our brain is the one that's producing these hormones that allows for this to happen in certain ways, and that we're able to know things like that ovulation only happens once it's released, it's 1 day in a cycle, and the egg can only live up to like 24 hours. And when we're defining this fertile window, you would think that we're just trying to get this like 1 day of ovulation as what we're looking for to either try to achieve a pregnancy or to avoid a pregnancy. But we also have to take into account that sperm can live for 3 to 5 days. Definitely closer to 5 with that great fertile mucus that can be present. And so we this window of possible fertility, or like the time that somebody could get pregnant, increases from just that like 24 hours of when the egg's alive to 5 days of maybe even 6, depending on who you talk to, about when sperm could be kept alive. And I think that that's like, what a cool thing that the female body can do, which is just like just an aspect of it. But I really think it's awesome that we can just see these biomarkers on a regular basis, and that it can be just so beneficial to know about your body in a bunch of different ways. So yeah, next week I'll talk a little bit more about cervical mucus and what that looks like, and how you can kind of start observing it and using it in your daily observations, where some of the history comes from it. But yeah, tonight just was a little bit, I'm recording this at night, that's why I keep saying tonight, was a little bit about just your anatomy, a little bit about cycle basics. I feel like it's hard to do without a visual. And yeah, just empowerment. And I just want to reiterate that all are welcome here, and I am here to support you in any way that I can. So if you are excited about learning more about your fertility, I'd love for you to subscribe, and just keep in touch, get to know me a little bit more and learn more about this. And I just appreciate you spending time with me today. If it helped you feel more connected or more empowered about your fertility, I'd love for you to share it with somebody or leave a review even. And then also feel free to join in my free Facebook group called The Red Circle, where we are going to talk more about cycles in depth, about menstruation, menarche, menopause, all the motherhood in between. So until next time, keep listening to your body. It's telling you way more than you realize.